The United Fruit Company didn't just sell bananas. It rewrote the map of Central America and left a trail of toppled governments in its wake. Everyone knows the story. A big American corporation went to Central America, exploited workers, stripped resources, and got rich. Greed, colonialism, the usual suspects. It's the narrative we've been taught since the 1970s. But the real mechanism of the United Fruit Company's power was far more precise and far more damaging than simple exploitation. Start in Boston, 1899. Preston and Baker, two fruit traders, merged their operations into the United Fruit Company. They weren't the first to export bananas, but they were the first to understand something crucial: control the infrastructure and you control the nation. By 1910, United Fruit controlled 75% of all banana exports from Central America. Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Panama. The company didn't just own plantations, it owned railroads, ports, telegraphs. It owned the channels through which money and information flowed. Here's where the story splits. The standard version says United Fruit exploited workers and governments bent to corporate will. True enough, but incomplete. The real story is about dependency. United Fruit didn't conquer Central America. It made Central America unable to function without it. Take Honduras. By the 1920s, bananas accounted for 60% of the nation's export revenue. The government's budget depended on it. The currency was pegged to it. Employment, infrastructure investment, even political stability, all tied to a single crop, controlled by a single American corporation. In Guatemala, it was worse. United Fruit owned more land than the government, more wealth, more infrastructure. When the Guatemalan government tried to raise taxes on fruit exports in 1928, the company simply reduced shipments. The government backed down. The lesson was clear. The corporation set terms, not the state. But here's what makes this a story of collapse, not just exploitation. United Fruit's model required constant growth, more plantations, more exports, more profit. The company expanded into marginal land, exhausted soil. It monoculture farmed itself into ecological fragility. Panama Disease struck in the 1930s, a fungus that killed banana plants. United Fruit had no reserves, no diversification, no backup. The company simply abandoned infected plantations and moved to new territory. But new territory wasn't infinite. By the 1940s, the model was cracking. Meanwhile, the nations it had made dependent were developing their own problems. Land inequality was extreme. Workers had no political power. Young people saw no future. And the governments? They'd never built institutions independent of United Fruit. They couldn't govern without it. They couldn't reform without risking it. In 1951, Guatemala elected Jacobo Árbenz. He ran on land reform, breaking up the large estates, redistributing to peasants. United Fruit owned 550,000 acres in Guatemala, most of it unused. Árbenz wanted to seize it. This is where the story pivots from economics to geopolitics. United Fruit's board included influential figures with ties to U.S. intelligence. The company branded Árbenz's reform as communist. Whether Árbenz was actually communist is debatable. What's certain, United Fruit had the ear of Washington. In 1954, the CIA orchestrated a coup. Árbenz fell. A military government took power. Land reform was reversed. United Fruit's lands were returned untouched. But here's the crucial detail. The coup didn't save the company. It delayed its collapse by decades while destabilizing Guatemala permanently. The real explanation for United Fruit's downfall isn't American military intervention. It's that the company had built an entire regional economy on itself. When competitors emerged, when disease struck, when workers demanded better conditions, the system had no flexibility, no alternatives. It could only collapse. By the 1970s, United Fruit was losing market share to competitors who diversified their operations. The company renamed itself Chiquita in 1990. It survived, but the model was dead. The nations it had made dependent were left with no infrastructure, no institutions, no economic diversity. Guatemala's military dictatorship lasted until 1985. Over 200,000 people died in the civil war that followed. Honduras became a staging ground for U.S. proxy wars. Costa Rica fared better, but still struggled with land inequality rooted in United Fruit's era. The collapse wasn't just corporate, it was continental. The United Fruit Company didn't fail because it was greedy. Plenty of corporations are greedy and endure. It failed because it built a system with no redundancy, no flexibility, no adaptation. It made entire nations dependent on a single crop, controlled by a single entity, with no way to transition when that model broke. That's the real lesson, not that corporations are evil, not that America is imperialist, but that concentration of economic power, especially over essential resources in developing nations, creates systemic fragility. When the concentrated entity fails, the entire system fails with it, and the people who built their lives around that system have nowhere to go. Subscribe for the next financial collapse, where one decision by one person or one company rewrites the lives of millions.